May is over, I played another big chunk of games, so let's talk about them. For anyone who's new or needs a refresher, I'm going to be giving every game I played in May a score out of 5 with a breakdown of what 1 to 5 means on your screen right now. It's not exactly a review scale, it's entirely based on what I would recommend, so a 5 isn't necessarily a once-in-a-generation title with essentially no flaws, it's just something that I'd recommend almost universally regardless of genre. I'm going to try and be a little bit more critical than I was last time, so you might see a couple of lower scores. Hey, who knows? Why am I talking like this? I'm including games that I haven't necessarily finished yet, as long as I've put enough time into them to come to a proper conclusion, and I'm also including games that I've played before and I'm replaying now. It's just everything I touched this month, including demos, so let's start with those. I played 4 demos this month: Thymesia, Fallen Aces, Turbo Overkill, and Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and my favorite was Turbo Overkill. This game is part of a niche movement in gaming that I've been really fond of, in old school looking shooters with a modern gameplay flair and a ridiculously fast pace. The difference with Turbo Overkill is that you get to slide into enemies to kill them.
With a chainsaw!
Your right leg in this game is augmented with a chainsaw that lets you rip through enemies like putty when you slide into them, and when you're not doing all of that, you have a wide array of guns to do the trick. Unlike its contemporaries in Ultrakill, Severed Steel, and Proteus, among others, Turbo Overkill emphasizes a much larger cityscape that adds a good sense of scope into the mix, while also including some of the other great aspects of those games that I just mentioned, like high freedom of movement, cool alt-fire modes, and enemies that give you zero time to breathe or stand still. The demo was good enough to convince me to snag the full game, even though it's in early access still, and I usually like to wait until a game hits 1.0 before trying it. That's one of the only downsides to this subgenre. It's very early access heavy. More than likely I'll have more to say about it once I play past the demo sections in June, but as for the demo, it's a 4 out of 5. I highly recommend you try at least this free snippet of the game. The next best demo was Kirby. This really put a lot of the goofiness and off-the-wall ideas of this new installment on full display, and it already let you play as a car, a cone, a vending machine, and the little walking pink ball of terror itself. It's clear that Mario Odyssey had an impact on this game, and while this demo is certainly a lot more straightforward, easy, and reliant on the gimmick than most parts of that game are, I still had a lot of fun trying it out. I don't know if I have it in me to drop 80 Canadian buckaroonies on a Kirby game, but I'll definitely keep my eye out for sales. I know it's got a lot of great reviews, and with this little taste of the full game, I can see why. It was a good time. 4 out of 5. Thymesia's was one of a bit more ups and downs. This one was a limited time demo, which unlike the last 2, was more like a mini beta than anything, with the actual game not coming out for another month or so. And playing it makes me A, happy that this game didn't release in December like it was initially planned, and B, worried about whether it could actually come out by its new August release date. A lot of my issues here are technical ones. There was a lot of stuttering even on my very capable PC. The motion blur was nauseating, although thankfully that was removable, but there was still a hanky quality to the way the camera moved in this demo, and I think the world at times looks a little bit washed and muddy. The colors aren't as sharp as you might like. These are all, for the most part, fixable issues, but I wonder how fixable they are just this close to release, and I hope that if it's still running like this come August, we just get another delay, because this game has a lot of potential. I've been singing its praises for a while. The combat needs a bit of tweaking with the parry and counter timings, which is something that the team has explicitly said they are working on improving following the feedback to this demo, but when it was clicking, it was a lot of fun. The base elements of the combat are a bit more complicated than your average Souls-likes. There's multiple types of parry counters depending on the type of attack that's coming, for example, and that made the demo feel like there was a somewhat higher bar for entry, as well as a higher potential skill ceiling than most Souls games, which, while tough of course, are usually very simple to grasp mechanically. The demo was far from perfect, but it showed off a game that, if fine-tuned correctly, can create a much more skill-based Souls-like experience that could be a ton of fun, so hopefully good progress is being made over there. 3 out of 5. And the worst of the 4 demos I played, Fallen Aces, which is another game that isn't out yet at the time of this recording. I named Fallen Aces as one of my favorite indies for E3 last year, and I think there's still some good stuff to work with, but the demo was a little bit lacking. I like the cardboard cutout style of objects and enemies, as well as the comic noir setting, and a few minor puzzle elements popped their heads in this small slice of the game, which were a good way to flesh it out, but the core loop felt pretty flat. Part of that, I think, is that this section of the game is really early on and focuses a lot on primal brawling, lots of clicking to punch people or hitting them with a pipe while they occasionally punch back, not super satisfying. But based on the trailer, there's a little bit more gunplay, a nice dodge, and a lot of interactive elements to play around with in the combat, which is a good sign for the final product, but the demo doesn't display that very well. I love the presentation, but that was the only thing that stuck out to me when playing this section, so so it gets a 2, but I'm gonna assume that it'll be able to hit a 3 or higher if some of its more promising elements pan out in the full game. The demo section went on way longer than I thought it would, so let's blaze through the next 2 games really quickly that I've already made videos on. The Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe is an expansion and improvement on a game that was already amazing to begin with. It has one of the most fun and insane narratives you'll ever find, period. It's genuinely funny, very creative, and unlike anything else out there really. It gets a 5 out of 5. Anyone with an open mind and a sense of humor will love this game. To Yomi, on the other hand, is much more of a mixed bag. It seems like a handful of my favorite reviewers were more positive on it than I was, but I stand by everything I said about it in my review, which you can check out here. Great atmosphere, great visuals, I love the mystical approach it headed down in its second half, big fan of the different perspectives, not a fan of how it played. It was slow, sluggish, and incredibly easy to cheese using 1 or 2 moves which had like 12 benefits and 0 downsides, while everything else felt like you were armed with the world's fluffiest pillow. All of which is especially bad on hard mode. If you do wind up playing this game, which I still think is worth playing at a cheaper price, especially if you have Game Pass where you get it for the cheapest price, none price, play it on medium. You'll be doing yourself a favor, not because hard is actually very hard, but because it makes the combat issues much more glaring. It's sitting between a 2 and a 3 for me. I'm gonna give it a 3 because it does do a lot right outside of the combat, but that is 90% of the core loop, so it's kind of a 2.5. It's hard to recommend fully, but it's hard to write off entirely as well. Moving on to the first of 3 Metroidvanias on this list, Haiku the Robot is a really great homage to the genre, and specifically Hollow Knight. It doesn't have Hollow Knight's gravitas or complexity, sure, but it's a pretty effective miniaturization of that title. The game will run you around 6 hours, and you'll come to find a familiar transportation system, modification system, shop system, and upgrades list, but in an environment that feels a lot more relaxing and simple. Nothing Haiku did really blew me out of the water, but it also had nothing that rubbed me the wrong way, and I had a great time playing through it. It feels like a lot more than the sum of its parts. Some of its naysayers call it kind of boring and derivative, which I'm not surprised the conclusion that some people came to, but if you know what you're getting into, a sort of diet Hollow Knight with slightly de-emphasized combat and solid but simple bosses, and that sounds like something that you'd be more than happy to try out, I think you'll enjoy this one. It gets a light 4. Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion is a game that I played because of its name. Can you blame me? This one is also on Game Pass and is another miniaturized, what you see is what you get type title. It's a goofy isometric adventure that only lasts a couple of hours, but in that time you meet tons of characters and fight some bosses using simple but effective methods. At first I was worried that this game was just gonna coast off its weird name and wind up being a really tacky title, but it's pretty competently designed and was a nice time killer. And that's exactly what this game is, really, a nice way to burn a few hours, but like I've said before, I'm okay if that's all you do as long as you do it well, so 3 out of 5, convinced me to commit tax evasion in real life. Loot River is a roguelike that I need to put a bit more time into to reach a final verdict on, but I still feel like I played enough to include it on this list. I was really excited for this game ever since I saw it get revealed, and while I'm not playing it as obsessively as I assumed I would, there's still a lot of merit to this one. I'd call Loot River an average game, but not average in the way that I said Gotham Knights looked kinda average, where nearly every element of that demo looked kind of but more like how To Yomi is average in that it's got some things holding it up and some things weighing it down, landing it smack dab in the center. The mechanic of moving platforms to traverse this monster-infested river is great. You get in tune with it very quickly, and you can use it strategically to thin out the herd in a densely packed area, or use it as an escape when you're in a jam. I'm also a fan of the look of this game, and some smaller elements like its interesting health potion duplication system, where I trust in your ability to use less potions early on will pay dividends later. But the 2 big issues with this game for me personally are the sheer length of levels that make progression tough, and the weird delayed combat. I don't think the combat here is as bad as To Yomi, but parry timings and counters seem very off. Parries are very drawn out, and sometimes you can press them before an attack is even launched at you and be in mid-animation once they finally attack, and you'll still get the parry off. And while that particular instance does work in your favor, the general flow of combat is harmed by the stiff animations. Levels run a bit too long with not much carryover with currencies or upgrades, which means a lot of runs, especially early on, feel truly wasted. After the first floor, for example, I don't have enough currency to buy a new weapon, but I died 5 or 6 times in a row on floor 2 because it was pretty long. And I lost all of the currency that I had built up, so even though I felt like I was putting a decent amount of time into this game, I kept going back to square one, which is a little bit annoying. As yet another game on Game Pass though, I'd say once again this is worth trying out despite its flaws. It's got a cool spin on a now all too familiar formula, so it might surprise you. 3 out of 5. Far Cry 6 is not good. See, I saw a lot of people saying that Far Cry 6 was lazy and Ubisoft wasn't changing up the formula at all, and anyone who had fatigue with Ubisoft and especially Far Cry would have a horrible time with this, but I'm in the minority of not really being tired of this general formula as long as it's well executed. I'm a fan of Origins, for example, and games that borrow from this formula like Ghost of Tsushima and Forbidden West. And even if it's not well executed, honestly, I still don't mind as long as I can turn my brain off and have fun with the gameplay. Far Cry 6 seemed like something I could could just absent-mindedly explore and blow things up and shoot people in, and sometimes that's all you want, but all that this game really made me realize is that I think I hate the Far Cry franchise. The only one that I like is 3, and I didn't even play that. I watched a walkthrough of it years ago. I fell off 4 quickly, I played all of 5, and to put it lightly, didn't love it, and it looks like I'm gonna fall off 6 pretty quickly too. I don't necessarily mind the baby-fed objectives and the boilerplate story, because again, I wasn't looking for anything serious or interesting, but the bigger these worlds get, the more you realize how much dead time they have. Throw in a couple more random events or something, I don't know, this is the worst example of it too. I'm spending basically 60% of my time getting places and 40% actually doing stuff. I have a video on this channel that somewhat defends the Ubisoft formula, which is a blanket term for this type of open world. It doesn't necessarily have to be made by Ubisoft, but to make it perfectly clear, because I think a couple people didn't understand that fully, I'm defending the type of games these can be and the idea of objective-based open worlds. They're definitely not all good, and they are still very easy to screw up and make boring if you're being lazy, and they certainly did that here. Also, the gunplay in these games is severely mid, so even when I'm doing the shooty bang bang, it's the most run-of-the-mill shooty bang bang in existence, so it can't even give me that. I don't take this video back because it doesn't actually go against anything that I said here, but man, I am annoyed that I spent money on this. 2 out of 5, and that might be a little bit generous. Let's have a bit of a palate cleanser, shall we? I think Gato Roboto is the perfect mini Metroidvania, and quite possibly might be the best way to introduce someone to the genre. It's got a fun premise, a little twist at the end, great level design, and solid gameplay. It's never overwhelming or confusing since it's sectioned off really well, which makes it easy to follow without feeling like it abandons exploration. And while some of the bosses are a little bit spammy, I think it has a great mix between the exploration and the more action-heavy segments. It's cheap, it's short, and it's really fun. This is a strong 4 on the cusp of a 5, honestly. It's just a really tight package. And let's just follow that up with the third and final Metroidvania I played this month, as promised, Insanely Twisted Shadow Planet. Everything that I said in my Metroidvania video talking about why I was excited to play this stands true after completing it. It's another short one, about 4 hours, and it features a lot of inspired puzzle sections amidst short spurts of combat, but really the fun comes from the epically evil planet that you're roaming around in. The style, colors, and winding pathways help build up the atmosphere of this planet, and although the brief cutscenes sometimes look like the nightmare fuel that is early computer-generated animation a la Ants and Toy Story, there's a bit of a weird nostalgia factor that comes along with that. This game feels like a short flash of creativity that didn't get the attention it deserved when it released an entire decade back, but I'm glad it was brought to my attention because I had a great time with it. Another strong 4. Arkos suffers from the unfortunate fate of being carried by its art style and having little else to offer. I'm a fan of voxel art, which is why I picked this game up, but I was met with gameplay that felt incredibly basic, encounters that never made me think and felt either really easy or slightly frustrating, and most detrimental of all, exceptionally flat level design. Level design is one of those things where 90% of the time, unless you're looking really hard, you don't notice it, and of that last 10%, half is from games that are so well made that the average layman, me, realizes, whoa, something about these levels, man, I don't know what it is, but it's pretty spicy. And the other half is from games that feel like they may as well have been one large corridor they were that plainly constructed. Arkos has no verticality, uninspired enemy placements, and a lot of moments where they just have 2 paths that are the exact same layout, duplicated. This happens multiple times, same path, same enemies, same mini-boss, just mirrored on the other side, and you have to go through both to continue. It's a shame that this game doesn't have more to offer in order to back up its artwork. 2 out of 5. This next one's pretty quick. Butcher, it was on a deep sale on the eShop, I picked it up, it's fun. It's a simple side-scrolling shooter, sometimes its scale isn't ideal for handheld mode and I have issues with ammo and health balancing, but it's a fun all-action game that you can probably grab for cheap. 3 out of 5, and by the way, since we're talking about deep sales, would you guys be interested in another reoccurring series where I buy 5 games for under 15 bucks and rank the overall haul? I had the idea when I was scrolling through the eShop and thought it'd be a cool way to show lesser known games that won't break the bank but might still be worth checking out. Obviously not just on the eShop, but really anywhere, and I thought I'd toss the idea out there, see if anyone's receptive to it. If that's something you want to see, just throw it in the comments. But anyways, last up, the only game on here that I've already played but I decided to run it back, Shovel Knight. This game is a little bit harder than I remember, not unmanageable by any means, but it really continues that old school spirit of side-scrolling action games. It's got some fun lore, a tightly crafted world, and it does a lot with very little. The bosses are great, there's a fair amount of optional challenge areas, each level feels very distinct, and while I personally never fell in love with the other characters' campaigns, there's a deceptively large amount of content in this one. If you haven't played it, I recommend that you remedy that right now. This is another solid 4 to end things off. Let me know if any of these games caught your attention, if you've played any of them before and what you thought, and what I should play next. I didn't actually get around to Stride or Half-Life like I expected to, but I might get around to them in June. I'm also thinking of playing Grease, Auto, Yoku's Island Express, and Quantum Break among others, so look forward to those in next month's What I Played. made. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you're new here, check out my other stuff, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.